Well, howdy and welcome everyone to another episode of the Lauren Musica Show, your favorite update in the battle for life, family, and freedom. So thrilled to have you with me. I'm Lauren Musica, attorney and human rights advocate, and I serve as president and CEO of Sidewalk Advocates for Life, the nation's largest peaceful sidewalk outreach organization. Closing abortion businesses, especially ones that are harming women or have multiple health code violations. I have a friend who does this for a living, and she takes such a unique approach, really an approach that's above reproach, that even her pro-choice friends are telling her that they can't really argue with it. Why do this? How to do this? We're going to talk about all that today, thereby giving you a blueprint to gather the right information to possibly do the same, allowing you to save lives and gradually end abortion in your community. I'm so excited to introduce our special guest today, Missy Martinez-Stone, one of my favorite people in the whole wide world. In fact, I say behind her back that she is my pro-life, I almost said pro-choice, pro-life best friend. Missy Martinez-Stone is a nationally recognized expert on ensuring the accountability of abortion facilities for their unsafe and illegal practices, ultimately leading to their closure. In 2018, she was asked to help develop an innovative women's advocacy organization, resulting in the launch of Reprotection in January of 2020. This organization has since evolved into the Center for Client Safety, with Missy serving as president and CEO. Through her dedicated efforts, Missy has played a pivotal role in suspending the operations of 4 abortion facilities within the past couple years, while concurrently spearheading ongoing investigations in more than 30 states. Missy started her pro-life career in 2013 at Students for Life of America, initially as the National High School Program Coordinator. She substantially expanded Students for Life groups nationwide in public and private high schools. She then took on the role of National Field Director, overseeing a rapidly expanding team of regional coordinators. Under her guidance, Students for Life crossed a significant milestone of supporting over 1,000 student groups. Missy also served on the board of directors at Choices Women's Center, a pregnancy resource center in Fredericksburg, Virginia. She led the student outreach committee in this capacity, significantly enhancing the pregnancy center's presence at local high schools and colleges. Missy's notable accomplishments have earned her recognition in prominent media outlets, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Christian Broadcasting Network, and various other national publications. Please welcome to the show, Missy Martinez-Stone. Hey there, how are you?
Hi, thank you so much. I should have told you, you didn't have to read all of that, but it's okay.
Oh, that was so impressive. I was rattling this off. I'm like, I have an awesome friend. Like, that's quite a resume there. So
I've done a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, you've been around the block a little bit. So, which is why we're having you on the show. So excited to have you. I was just on your podcast, and then, upon launching the show, I knew that I had to have you on. In fact, I know I tracked you down to make sure you took a time slot so I could have you on the show.
I'm sorry.
No, it's so worth it. So good. So, okay. Tell us, for those who may not know you, who is Missy Martinez-Stone, and how did you come to investigate abortion facilities?
I know, it's wild. People ask me that pretty regularly, and it's, I just kind of landed in my lap and ended up being the best fit for me. I started probably getting involved with pro-life work when I was a teenager. I was living in Northern Virginia at the time, and thankfully was part of a church community that was very open about their stance on abortion. And, had because of our proximity to DC, we had national pro-life leaders that went to the church, and that really influenced our involvement in the pro-life movement. And coming from a Protestant, like evangelical church, that's a big deal, because like a lot of churches in those denominations are pretty quiet on abortion, but thankfully mine was not.
Yeah.
And they took us to the March for Life every year, and I just had this really powerful moment. I remember it clear as day, when I was about 14 or 15, walking up Constitution Avenue, surrounded by hundreds of thousands of people, and thinking, wow, like this is so big. This is
Yeah.
such a big injustice. And I think this is going to be a really important part of my life. And that kind of just set me on the course. I got my degree in political science with the intention of being involved in the pro-life movement. I was kind of this was back before Students for Life really had a presence on campuses. This was like early 2000s.
Mm.
I was kind of known as like the weird pro-life girl at my college. Um, and yeah, moved back to the DC area and started at Students for Life of America, completely underqualified for the task that was handed to me.
Mm.
And I just went, okay, I'll do it. So I was there for
Wow.
a number of years, I think about 6 years, developing their student program. And then I just had a moment of trying to really discern what my specific gifts are and how that overlaps with the pro-life movement. Because
Mm.
while I was at Students for Life, I just realized I'm not an activist. And
Mm.
some people are really good at that, and I'm not.
Mm.
And I really wanted to look at my own gifts and my specialties and the things where I what I enjoyed doing and where I felt like I brought a lot of value. And I thought I'm really good at systems. I'm really good at processes, administration, policy, a lot of the stuff that requires like research and strategic thinking. Um, and I was like, well, how does this fit? How does a systems and policy, a process person, administrative person fit into the movement? And I was having lunch with David B. Wright one day, and he starts telling me about this amazing project that they want to test. And he starts describing, he's like, but the one thing we're missing is somebody who can really take it on and be the one managing it and see it through, because they were really relying on community members who were doing a lot of other things, and stuff wasn't moving forward because they were busy, being pregnancy center directors and policymakers. He said, we really need somebody on the ground that can take ownership of this. And he starts describing this idea that involves systems and processes and policy and research. And I literally looked at him and I said, David, that's what I do. Like
Wow.
that's exactly what I want to do. Um,
Mm.
and that was the beginning of then reprotection. That was January of 2018, I believe, when we had that conversation.
Yeah.
Um, and it kind of all came from that.
Wow, the rest is history, right?
Yeah.
I think that's such a good lesson for all of us. A lot of times when we're trying to figure out our place really in the greatest human rights movement on earth, we often can look to the intersection of the crisis, the problem, and then our gifting, right?
Mhm.
And I feel like from that often comes our calling. Like I know at one point I was realizing that I was nerding out over sidewalk counseling methodology. Like who does that, right?
Right.
And
Right.
then realizing that again, there may be a call there. So that's so powerful. So those of you that are listening and thinking, wow, I've got all these really odd gifts or interests or whatever, it very well may be that there is a special niche for you in the movement. So good. Really, really good to think about. Missy, we're going to get into more of the nitty gritty about your work, but I want to ask you about this because I feel like you're such an incredible example of this. When it comes to doing this work and what it means to check your ego at the door. We talk about this sometimes. I think of you. When I think of humility in the movement, you're one of the first people that comes to mind. How do you stay focused on your mission and not get distracted by the possibility of the spotlight? Because at different times, we're on big news networks, we're being interviewed, people are looking to us for leadership. And if we're not careful, our ego can get in the way of what really God wants to do through us. So how do you stay humble in this work?
Yeah. I do. Humility is so important, and it's becoming the characteristic that I look for most
Mm.
in partners, in especially professional partnerships and when I'm hiring, I mean, if someone has humility, they are just going to be so much easier to work with.
Yeah.
It's going to be so much more fruitful. It's going to be a much more beneficial relationship, and it's something that I think a lot of people struggle with. I will
Mhm.
say I might have a little bit of an upper hand simply because I don't enjoy the spotlight. Um,
Right.
you know, it is a little easier for me because I just don't want to be in front of people. It's not my
Mm.
it's it it's not my disposition to want to be the center of attention.
Mhm.
I'm much more introverted, even though people are like, "There's no way you talk to me, you'd never know that." But on the inside, I'm very introverted, and I
Mm.
really enjoy being behind the scenes, and so that definitely helps. But I think a big part of it is just um, keeping your perspective of
Yeah.
we are part of something bigger than ourselves.
Ooh.
And if we want to accomplish the ultimate goal, the big victory, we need everybody. And
Mhm.
that we run into issues when someone thinks they have the silver bullet, and
Mm.
it just doesn't exist. Because if we want to be successful and not only making abortion illegal, but making it obsolete, making it so that women don't even feel like they need to have this option, we have to have it has to be holistic. We have to be coming at it from all these different, areas. We need the pregnancy centers to be the best pregnancy centers. We need the sidewalk advocates to be the best sidewalk advocates. We need like, it's not going to get done just from one way. And when you can take a step back and go, I'm part of something bigger,
Mm.
and in order to be a part of that something bigger,
Yeah.
I need to be willing to work with other people. It just allows you to go, I'm not I I'm not a big fish in a small pond, right? Like,
Yeah.
we are just a piece of this.
Mm.
And if we want to be successful, we have to work together. And
Yeah.
that requires humility, that requires checking your ego at the door. Um, because that's what I'm interested in results. I'm
Yeah.
interested in results. And to me, it's very logical. If you want results, you do one, two, A, B, C. And I'm like, oh, that's what it takes. Great, let's do that.
Mm.
And I just really try to keep things in the bigger picture, in the bigger perspective.
Yeah. So good. I really could not have said it any better. That's so powerful. One of the things that's interesting about what we do at Sidewalk Advocates for Life is that we are interfacing with a woman at a critical moment in her life, doing crisis intervention. But our goal is to get her into the arms of those who can do ongoing crisis management, right? Because there's a risk
Mhm.
that she may choose life with us on the sidewalk and then go back home into all of the pressures that brought her there in the first place. And so our success rises and falls on our resources, on partnering with our local pregnancy resource center, right? And it's sometimes hard initially to just go deliver a woman to a pregnancy center and then let go, right?
Mhm.
But just having a moment to revel in the role that you played in
Yep.
that, right? The role, Missy, that you play in shutting down abortion facilities more behind the scenes, and nobody may ever know the role that you played. But at the end of the day, we get to revel in the idea that this woman chose life, that lives are
Mhm.
being saved simply because, God allowed us to play this part of the puzzle. And so I just
Yeah.
get excited about delivering a woman to the pregnancy center. And then my goal is to go back to the sidewalk, deliver the next one, and then deliver the next one. Right. So,
Yeah, and it really is for me, it's more efficient,
yeah.
that way. Like,
Yeah.
again, I'm a very logical person. To me, a lot of it's just math, I just go, it just makes sense
Yeah.
to let the expert be the expert in their field, because you're just gonna get it done better and faster, and then
Yeah.
we work together. It's just, morals and philosophy aside of, like, yes, we need to be good humans and have humility. I'm like, it's also just it just makes more sense, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
it
We get
just
out of our own way.
works better.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. When we get out of the way, things flow a lot better,
Yes.
right? We do
Yes.
our part and do it well, and pass the baton and allow
Yes.
someone else to do their part and do it well. Because at the end of the day, this is about lives and prospectively souls, right? It's not
Yeah.
really about us. And I think
No.
when we keep that focus, we can actually save more babies. We can help more
Yes.
moms, which is the
Yeah.
ultimate goal. So good.
Mhm.
Well, turning back to your work more specifically, you've shut down a handful of abortion facilities by simply holding them accountable to the law in most cases. So tell us a little bit more about how you've done that, how you do that, and how people can partner with you in their local community to do the same.
Mhm. Yeah, actually, when you're reading my biography, I realized I was like, "Oh, that number is not," because we said 4. I think we're up to 5 or 6.
Wow.
We have 9, like, solid victories, between
Yeah.
shutting down operations, keeping facilities from opening, abortionists, like, medical licenses being disciplined or suspended or revoked,
Yeah.
disciplinary action being taken, all those kinds of things. Um, and what I like to say is we don't shut them down, they shut themselves down, because
Good point.
all
Yeah.
we're really doing is bringing to light what they are choosing to do.
Mm,
So they are making conscious decisions to not comply with basic medical and safety standards. And most of our cases are not even regarding like abortion specific code. So you have a lot of pushback from the abortion industry saying, like, they call them trap laws, where like you're just trying to put unrealistic standards on abortion facilities so that they are shut down. No, we're not even into what you would call pro-life legislation.
hmm,
We are reporting basic health and safety violations that these abortion facilities are refusing to comply with, that results in dangerous uh, environments for these women to be in, women ending up in the hospital with complications. Um, and so what we do is we work with the local community. So we're working with your sidewalk advocates, we're working with the pregnancy centers, and we equip them on how do you identify violations? How do
mm,
you report it appropriately, in a way that protects the woman that you are serving from publicity, or from being her story being used in a way that feels like exploitation. Like, we don't want them to feel exploited.
yeah.
We just want to offer the service that if you felt wronged, if something felt wrong, there is something you can do about it. So we equip the local community on how do you identify these violations? How do you do it appropriately? How do you stay HIPAA compliant for the pregnancy centers? That's really important. But get
Mm,
us the information in a way that is actionable. So we tell them, like, this is what we need, because there's been an expectation, I think, from pro-life people that if they just hear something happen, like, we should just tell the medical board. And I'm like, that doesn't work. Like, it has to
mm,
be documented. There has to be proof that, like, there's a process to get their attention. And so we have really perfected what information is needed in order to actually get these regulatory agencies to respond.
yeah.
And so it's really bridging that gap between the laws on the books that the policymakers are working really hard to do, and then how those laws are being implemented on the ground in the day to day. The pregnancy centers, the sidewalk advocates, they see it, and then we go, okay, here's the gap,
Yeah.
and we get that information to the appropriate people.
So good. I actually didn't have this in the outline, but let me ask you this. Give me your craziest example of an abortion, a set of abortion facility violations, right? What are some,
Ouch.
give me a couple cases where it would blow people's minds if they heard it.
Oh gosh, it's hard to even know where to start,
No.
honestly. Our first permanent closure, was an 87-year-old that was showing signs of mental and physical impairment. So a lot of stories about him having really shaky hands,
Ooh.
could barely communicate. He's 87 and he was running this abortion facility by himself. Wasn't even licensed as an abortion facility because he was lying to the health department about because it was in Florida, and it was like, if it's less than 50%, then it doesn't. I'm like, that's all he does. So it wasn't even licensed as an abortion facility. Culminated with a girl running out of his facility screaming, "Call 911," because she was so
Oh,
afraid for her life. I mean, just wild. And as wild as that sounds, it still took the medical board a year to be willing to open the case, because he was an abortionist. They didn't want to touch it. And so we had to appeal up the chain of command. And he was forced into retirement, and the facility was permanently shut down.
mm,
We've dealt a lot with, gosh, eh, unlicensed people distributing controlled substances, the lack of mandatory reporting,
wow.
women and children in abusive situations not being properly reported to, uh, Child Protective Services. Oh, gosh, there's so many. It's
So
really
many.
hard. Yeah, I mean,
Oh,
anything you can imagine, any rule you could possibly think of breaking. I mean, there's a guy in Arizona who you have to fill out paperwork saying, like, that you accounted for the baby after the abortion to ensure that the abortion was complete, and he
yeah.
was just filling out the paperwork beforehand because he didn't want to deal with it. And so they weren't actually looking and making sure that it wasn't an incomplete abortion. It was resulting in women just ending up in the emergency room with infections and incomplete abortions. Um,
Wow.
yeah, I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah. And some people may be tempted to say, well, Missy, you're just finding like an anomaly here and there, right? But you've seen something different. Can you talk
Yes.
about just generally throughout the abortion industry? Is this more common than people think, these
Yeah.
violations?
Right. So the abortion industry's narrative is that these extreme cases like Kermit Gosnell and Curtis Boyd and kind of those names that you hear, they want
Mhm.
to say this is the extreme,
Yeah.
right? But that is not what we have found. It's
Wow.
actually the norm.
Oh,
We have never, ever investigated an abortion facility and found it in compliance, ever. Every
wow.
single one that we've looked into has had serious, either the physician has had a serious history of medical malpractice or criminal. Most of the abortionists that are under investigation right now have a criminal history. Um,
Wow.
uh, like I was thinking the other day, because someone asked a similar question, and I was like, I'm pretty sure every single abortionist that we are investigating right now has a criminal history, and that involves fraud, drugs, child abuse. I
Mm,
mean, eh, it's crazy. So
mhm.
because people will say, like, in criticism of what we do, of like, well, aren't you just really working towards abortion facilities, being cleaner, being safer? What if all of them were in compliance? And I'm like, that is never going to happen. Like,
Yeah.
like, in a perfect world, yeah, they would all be in compliance, but they are unwilling because it costs money to be in compliance. And the type of people that are willing to be in this industry are usually ones with a moral compass that is off. Like,
Yeah.
these are not, the top, like, graduated top of their class at Harvard physicians. Um, there's something really dark about abortion, and the people that are willing to be in this industry are not usually on the up and up. And so I, I do not see a world in which the abortion industry
Is
starts
in compliance.
starts becoming in compliance. They
Wow.
they have shown their unwillingness. They fight every standard that's put on them. They
Mm,
don't care. They don't
wow.
care.
Unbelievable. One other question in this regard. There's so many people that go and pray and peacefully reach out at abortion facilities, and they get a gut check.
Mhm.
Something's off. Like a common story that we hear in Sidewalk Advocates for Life is, hey, vultures have started circling the dumpster in
Yeah,
the
right.
back. I've stood outside of
I know.
abortion facilities where there is
I know.
medical
Yep.
paraphernalia on the ground, right?
Yep.
Which is another violation. Like, I mean, I could witness to story upon story upon story, having done this now for over 20 years. When people have that gut check, even if they
Mhm.
don't know really where this is leading, is that a good time to come to you? What would you say to somebody who's like, hey, something's off here?
Yeah, it's kind of it's similar to like where there's smoke, there's a fire.
Yeah.
Um, if it feels wrong, it probably is. I mean, we've had a few cases where someone will bring something to us and we'll go, it sounds weird, but because what we do is we'll go to medical professionals and we'll say, hey, what is the standard here?
Mm.
So that we
Mhm.
actually have something to compare it to, because there have been questions where like sometimes we're like, oh, that sounds weird. And then the medical professional will be like, no, it's actually not. But
Mhm.
for the most part, uh, it usually is something. And so two things can happen. One is that or actually three things can happen. One is you have the information, we can take it and we can file complaints. The
Mhm.
second is it's something, but we don't quite have enough information, but now we know where to look and what to look
Yeah.
out for. So it gives us better information on like what to be on the lookout for and where to look. And it kind of gives us a direction. So then we can go back to the advocate and say, okay, we researched this, keep an eye out for these things. Right. And
Yeah.
then that could lead to better information being brought back in the case. The third thing that's happened is something will feel wrong, but then when we actually go to the code, even though it's ethically questionable, it's not technically illegal because of
Mm.
some loophole,
Yeah.
right? So this happened in Mississippi before with the Jackson Women's Health Organization. It was the Pink House in Jackson. Mississippi Sidewalk advocates came to us and said, or as a pregnancy center said, they have a secretary, doing ultrasounds, which again happens
Mm.
all of the time, right?
Wow.
Unqualified people doing ultrasounds, right? Doing diagnostic ultrasounds. Uh, and we went, that's terrible. But then when we went to Mississippi Code, they don't have any requirements. Actually, very few states have a requirement saying in order to do diagnostic ultrasounds, you have to have some kind of certification in ultrasound and ultrasound technology and sonography. I think only 3 states have it.
Unbelievable.
Right?
Yeah.
So then I go to, the policymakers and I go, hey, you got this huge gap here because like in the real world, nobody who wants to do ultrasounds can get a job without these certifications. So technically they're like, we don't have to say it, but because it's not technically illegal, the abortion facilities are going to do it. And so we
Mm.
can then go back to the policymakers and go, this is a huge gap that needs to be addressed.
Let me pivot for a second, Missy, and ask you a different question. What you do uniquely is holding abortion facilities accountable to the law with the hope to shut down these dangerous abortion businesses. We hope to shut down abortion facilities through the power of prayer and peaceful outreach. There's a handful of people in the pro-life movement, or identify as pro-life, who have recently started taking a law-breaking approach. Going in, actually walking into abortion facilities, trespassing, and initially offering help. But then when the help is refused, switching to a protest oriented disposition and maybe staging a sit in. Some of them have used ropes and bike chains and locks to, um, you know, inhibit passage in the abortion facility, or chain equipment and things like this. So it's a little bit more of a aggressive, legally risky approach. Um, and here at Sidewalk Advocates for Life, we don't attack people, but we do have a dialogue about ideas and best practices. And I'd love to just hear from you, especially knowing that some of these individuals have recently been charged under the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act and, been given federal prison time recently. What is your thought about best practices in closing abortion facilities? Yeah, what would you say to that?
Yeah. For me, this is where my logical brain really helps because I can kind of pull myself out of the situation and just look at it very objectively. And it just comes down to math for me.
Mhm.
And it's while the protesting or the blocking, the shutting down of the facilities physically, because you are inhibiting people from entering or, whatever's going on, it results in a facility being shut down for maybe an afternoon or a day,
Yeah.
but then they will resume operations, and a lot of times, most of the time, and I've talked to former abortion workers who have said most of those women will just reschedule.
Yeah.
Um, but the result is millions of dollars and possibly years being spent on defending that one afternoon, the decisions made on that one afternoon
Yeah.
of closure, right? And I'm not, we don't officially take a stance on all this, but I just go, look at the math here. Like the
Yeah.
afternoon, it was shut down, and then millions of dollars of resources, of pro-life resources, were having to be poured into into these cases as a result. And now people are in jail for 5 years and cannot impact the operation of abortion facilities again,
Yeah.
and are probably going to be very slow to do that again because they don't want to go back to jail. And as convicted felons,
Yeah.
there's ramifications that are going to prohibit them from doing a lot in the rest of their life. And all of that was an afternoon closure. Whereas I go, let's change the equation. Can we put all of those resources in at the front end? And because our cases take 3 to 4 years. I mean, these are long cases. We are playing the long game. And yes, we don't get the splashy news story. We don't get all of the media attention.
Yeah.
But when we pour our resources in on the front end and do it in a way where we're above reproach, we're in compliance, we're exposing their illegal actions, not doing illegal actions ourselves, right?
No.
What it results in is a permanent closure
Yeah.
of these facilities, and the long-term impact of, Pensacola does not have an abortion facility and has not now for what, a year and a half?
Right.
And that was one of the only abortion facilities on the I-10 corridor. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
huge impact, but we had to stay on that case for a couple of years, 2.5 years moving up
Mm.
to it. And so again, it just comes down to strategy and math of it's harder this way. It's harder our way to shut
Yeah.
down an abortion facility. It takes longer. It's not as I don't know, appealing maybe to the media,
Mm.
but the result is so much bigger. And then we could turn around and do it again. Like
Yep.
we're not we're not backing ourselves into a corner and prohibiting us from doing this work again. We can do this over and over. As long as they are breaking laws, we can investigate them and help shut them down. And
Yeah.
so I just look at it as it might not feel, you might not get that dopamine hit, immediately.
Yeah.
But that's where you go, it's not about me. It's not about getting attention. It's about playing the long game and what is actually going to shut down this facility permanently. And
Yeah.
that's the approach that we take.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I just by way of analogy, I think back to the Holocaust when millions of Jewish people were being killed, and the
Mhm.
people that rescued the most people from death were people that were
Yeah.
thinking very strategically, not people who were running into the concentration
Right.
camps and barricading doors. They would have been killed themselves, right? Or
Right.
their freedom would have been restricted in some way. But really understanding that we're playing the long game here and we're
Mhm.
looking for long-term results to
Yeah.
save the most lives possible. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Mhm. Right.
Um,
Imagine if Schindler's List if he
Mm,
if he was very public about the fact that he was saving, like, we wouldn't have a story,
yeah. Yeah.
right? Like,
Absolutely.
there is something not only strategic, but almost, like, beautiful about doing these good deeds in secret, right? Like, doing, because then he was honored, later in his life, but at the moment, he wasn't getting the attention,
Yeah.
and I think that's where we have to be willing to say, "It's not about me, it's not about attention, it's about what is going to save the most lives."
Absolutely. And standing in front of an abortion facility some days when you wonder if the only result was, hey, I got a suntan, right?
Right.
So many abortion workers, so many former abortion workers tell us that when you felt like there was nothing happening, that's actually when the
Yeah,
most was happening inside in the hearts
yeah,
and minds of people. So, ironically, it's the most efficient way to win people over because I can't jerk someone to Jesus. I can't, flip the lights
right,
on and make them make a different choice. When has that ever worked, right?
yeah,
But I can slowly invite them to a different way. And
mhm,
sometimes I can do so very quickly through an offer of help and resources and all of that. But part of my success is my ability to stay on that sidewalk,
yep,
to
yeah, it's
maintain my
perseverance, yeah,
disposition, right? Because I've got to
yeah,
be a safe person for her when she goes in and then when she comes out. And a lot of them do initially go in after an offer of help and they come out and they want our help. I would say that's
mhm,
probably happened to me about a third or so of the time where I've made this
mhm.
valiant offer of help. And then we start to panic. We go, oh my gosh, she got sucked back
It's
there with the
happening! Yeah,
vortex, that
yeah,
pulled her back there and she's gone. And that
yeah,
really just is not the
yeah,
experience that I've had. Like so many of them need to go experience the darkness of the facility.
yep,
And if they have experienced light out on the sidewalk, they want to be back out
yeah,
there with us. Some of them have
yeah,
to feel that contrast to
yep,
come back out and to choose
mhm,
life. So
yep,
again, it's so important to maintain our disposition. Such a lesson there.
mhm, mhm.
Last couple questions here. What do you say, Missy, to people who say that if you really cared about women, you'd give them legal access to abortion? You just want to save babies. You're just on a warpath here. How would you respond to that? Because you've got lots of different friends. We've talked about this before, that
Yeah,
you've got a lot of, pro-choice friends. I've got pro-choice
yeah,
friends too.
yeah.
How do you respond to that?
That's a great question. Uh, I what I love about what we do is I kinda jokingly say, like, we do pro-life work that, like, everybody can get behind, right? Like,
Mm,
it's very accessible to people who are
mhm.
pro-choice, um, because we are dealing, like, we're not actually addressing the issue of abortion or the morality of abortion itself.
Yeah.
We are dealing with the practical, tangible, impacts of the decisions the abortion industry makes, right? And so, I'll talk to my friends who are pro-choice. Some of my dearest friends are pro-choice, but they understand what I do. And I'll tell them, like, yeah, we had an 87-year-old with shaking hands who was trying to do surgery. And they all go, oh, no. I'm like, exactly.
Mm,
Like, the
mm,
average person understands the importance of what we do. And I think there's a lot of misinformation about what the abortion industry is actually like. I think most people assume it's like going to a doctor's office, like a
mm.
clean, sanitary doctor's office, or like a oral surgeon or an outpatient center, and it's not. And so
Yeah.
helping people understand that the lack of regulations on this industry has resulted in very unsafe facilities. They go, "Oh yeah, that's," the average person goes, "Yeah, that doesn't make sense." Like, so I was talking to one of my neighbors, and she's just this beautiful human. She grew up in inner city Chicago, and uh, just lives, like, she's very hippie, like, artsy, like, kinda woo-woo, and, I love her so much. She is not pro-life, and I was
Mm,
explaining to her that Illinois does not regulate abortion facilities at all. Like, they are not, under the jurisdiction of the health department as a result
mm.
of the state kind of the pendulum swinging the other way, and she goes, That's stupid, like, that's not helpful at
Yeah.
all," and I'm like, "Yeah." So I think a big thing about what we do is I keep the bad guys. Like the bad guys
Mhm.
are the abortion industry and the abortionists themselves, people running the business. Like they are not the ones that we are trying to convince here. Like these are
Yeah.
people that do not care. But most people, when I tell them what I do, they go, "Oh yeah, that makes sense." Like, "Oh yeah, they should be regulated."
Mm,
Um, and yeah, that shouldn't be happening to women because the people who want like actual legal access to abortion, they don't
mhm,
want it to look like what the abortion industry looks like. They want
mhm.
it safe. They like the whole thing is they want abortion to be legal so that women don't die from pregnancy. I mean, that's the abortion industry's narrative. It's like if women don't have access to abortion, they die. And I go, no, the abortion industry that you are supporting is the one that's actually killing them, you
Yeah.
know? And so it's really about changing that narrative to say, if you want legal access to abortion, then you have to agree to standards. The
Yeah.
same standards that every other medical, you know, practitioner
Entity.
personnel
Yeah.
has to agree to. I have a friend who's a nurse anesthetist, and so and she works in an outpatient surgery center. So it's very similar. It's like the closest thing I can get to what an abortion facility should be. And all the time, I'm just like, don't think, just react. And I'll tell her the things I deal with. And she's just like, that would never fly
Right.
in a surgery center here. That would never fly in the world of the surgery center. Like that is, they need to lose their life. And I'm like, yes, yes,
Yes.
yes.
There you
And
go.
so, yeah, I just change the narrative and I just say, look, even if we don't agree on abortion, let's at least agree that if it's going to be legal, there needs to be standards because most people, the people that I'm actually interested in having conversations with and who I feel like I can engage on the subject that are reasonable will go, oh, duh.
Right. That's
Right?
messed up. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it's a
That's the
given.
beginning of conversion right there, is just finding that point of human
Yes.
commonality and
Yes.
walking people back, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Mhm.
Because what I'm doing is I'm starting to sow those seeds of doubt,
Yeah.
of questioning, of, you know, maybe the thing I've been told my whole life from the abortion industry and from Planned Parenthood's, incredible marketing isn't true. Let's
Yeah.
like stop and consider,
Right.
and I go out of my way to be like, I'm not trying to be hyperbolic. I really am not. Like I can print out the medical or like the reports from the investigative offices and you can read these grotesque cases that I deal with. Like
Golly.
this is the state and most people would go, yeah, that's unacceptable. But
Right.
the
Right.
abortion industry is not willing to make those changes.
Yep, and that's abortion right there. Like you said, these are not anomalies. This is
Yeah.
part of the practice of abortion and the industry. And we need to help people understand that. You've even opened my eyes to that, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, I stand outside and you get clues here and there, you get gut checks here and there, but you guys, with what you have seen, with what you have investigated, I mean, it really is mind blowing, unbelievable. Well, thank you so much, Missy, for being with me. This has been so much fun. I know sometimes it sounds weird to say this has been fun talking about
I
abortion,
know.
but I
Right.
love talking about the victory, right? The power that we have to make a difference, and that's really what just lights me up inside. So,
Mhm.
thank you so much for all that you do. We will continue to be in prayer for you guys. Keep up the great work. Right?
Thanks.
Thanks. All right. Such a good discussion with Missy. In closing here, I just wanted to piggyback off of something that Missy said. Really a sentiment of value that she expressed during this interview that I think is so powerful. And that is how we bridge gaps with people that may not understand the idea that we could give ourselves over to full-time pro-life work, especially because they may be on the other side, right? So how do we bridge gaps? How do we help people to gradually embrace life? And again, Missy said this so well, but finding a point of commonality, finding a human sentiment, and then just kind of gradually walking them back through logic. I remember one time I was getting my hair cut. I had a hairdresser that was completely on the other end from myself politically, right? And she asked me one time what I did for a living. And I usually start off with a softball, right? I said, well, I am an attorney, but I run a nonprofit that helps women in crisis pregnancies. And of course, who's going to be like, oh, that's terrible? She said, oh, that's great, right? And then another time that I went to get my hair cut with her, she had a client that also was getting serviced and was sitting there and asked me what I did for a living. So again, I repeated the same thing back to her. And then she goes, well, how do you do that? How do you actually help women in crisis pregnancies? And I had a moment where I was like, oh boy, I'm getting ready to really define this for people, right? Of course, my hairdresser looked over at me, wanting really to know the same thing. And I said, well, I peacefully train people how to go to abortion facilities and offer life-affirming alternatives, and to be there for the women and the families who are in crisis. And the client immediately, probably because I live in the great state of Texas, so I'm surrounded by conservatives in suburbia, especially, she said, that's amazing. And I held my breath for a second as my hairdresser started to respond. And she looks at me and goes, that's really great, Lauren. And she told me later that her kind of MO, her point of view was that if we're really pro-choice, then we should be okay with giving women all of their choices. And I told her, absolutely, you get it, right? And I was able to even from there weave in some of the stories from the sidewalk and things that my friend Missy Martinez-Stone had uncovered about the abortion industry. And it really planted, I think, some powerful seeds in our relationship. I don't know that she's pro-life today. I have no idea. I moved on to a different hairdresser. She actually got out of the business around COVID, but I know that those were powerful conversations. Those were seeds that were planted that God can then water and help to grow later. And I think that that's where it really all starts, right? We don't leave behind what we know to be true about abortion. But I think when people are on opposite sides of the fence, we can find a human commonality and just begin to walk from there. And so I just really encourage you, have the courage to speak up about your convictions, about what you do at the right time, plant those seeds and trust that God will water them and help it to grow. All right. Well, with that, thank you again for joining me for another episode of the Laura Musica Show. We'll be back here next Friday at 9 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Central on Facebook Live, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Thank you so much, everybody.